The sound was like a bone snapping, the crack of the gavel. $300. And just like that, Harriet Montgomery's life wasn't her own anymore. The summer sun of 1878 beat down on Redemption Creek, Colorado, and it had baked all the mercy out of the land. Harriet stood on a wooden platform, the whole town staring up at her. They weren't looking at a person. They were looking at property. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. At 22, she'd already buried both her parents, lost their farm. This was just one more thing to endure, one more hell to walk through. "Sold to Mr. Jeremiah Black," the auctioneer shouted, his voice as thin and reedy as he was. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Nobody would. A cold silence fell over the crowd. Jeremiah Black. Even the heat seemed to back away from that name. He was a man made of leather and shadow, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of a mountainside with a dull knife. He owned the biggest cattle ranch in the territory. He owned the town. And now, he owned her. "Get in the wagon," he grunted. It wasn't a request. The words were stones he threw at her. He tossed a small, heavy bag of coins to the auctioneer and didn't give Harriet a second glance. He was already done with the transaction. Now it was just a matter of collecting his goods. But someone else was watching. From the edge of the crowd, a man stood tall, his jaw set so tight it could have cracked walnuts. His name was Isaac Reed, and he'd been in town for 3 days, looking for work. His eyes, the color of a gathering storm, were locked on Harriet. He saw the pride in the way she held her shoulders. He saw the terror she was trying so hard to hide. "That ain't right," Isaac muttered to an old-timer standing beside him, a man with a beard like spun snow. The old man just shrugged, his shoulders slumping with the weight of a lifetime of looking the other way. "Ain't much right when it comes to Jeremiah Black," he wheezed. "Her daddy owed him money. Fever took the parents, Black took the rest. Says the girl was collateral. Our sheriff agrees, seeing as how he's in Black's pocket deep enough to tickle his toes." Isaac watched Black lead Harriet toward a wagon. Their eyes met across the dusty square. Just for a second. But in that second, something passed between them. A silent question, a desperate plea, and it lit a fire in Isaac Reed's chest. "Don't get ideas, stranger," the old-timer warned, seeing the look on Isaac's face. "Black's got 20 men on his payroll, each one meaner than the last. You cross Jeremiah Black, you end up as buzzard food." But Isaac was already moving. He wasn't a man who could stand by. Not then. Not ever. He'd seen too much of the world's ugliness to let this one pass without a fight. "Miss," he called out. His voice was calm, but it cut through the noise of the street. Black stopped, his hand on Harriet's arm. He turned, and his face was a thundercloud. "This ain't your concern, cowboy. Move along." Isaac kept walking, slow and deliberate, his hands held open at his sides. Just wondering if the lady might need a moment to collect her things. A flicker of something, hope, maybe, flashed in Harriet's eyes before she stamped it out. She knew better than to hope. "She's got nothing worth collecting," Black snarled, his grip tightening on her arm. "And she's no lady. She's my property, bought and paid for." Isaac's hand drifted down, brushing the worn leather of his holster. "No person's property, Mr. Black, not since '65. Black laughed. It was a horrible sound, like rocks grinding together in a landslide. "Shows what you know about the law out here, boy. This is a labor contract, signed by the judge himself." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "She works for me, till her father's debt is paid." Isaac didn't look at the paper. He looked at Harriet. "And how long might that take?" "That's between me and my employee," Black said, his lips twisting into something that wasn't a smile. "Now, I suggest you find your way to the saloon before you find your way to a shallow grave." Two of Black's men who'd been leaning against a nearby wall straightened up. Their hands drifted down to their guns, casual but menacing. The message was clear. Isaac took a half step back. It wasn't retreat. It was assessment. He looked at Harriet again, his storm cloud eyes asking a question. "Miss, is this your wish?" Before she could answer, Black jerked her toward the wagon. "She doesn't have wishes anymore." "I can speak for myself," Harriet said. Her voice was quiet, but it was steel. She pulled her arm free from his grasp. She looked at Isaac, this stranger who was risking his life for her. "This is not my wish, Mr. Reed, but I have no choice." "There are always choices," Isaac said, his gaze locked with hers. "There's right, and there's wrong, and that stands above any piece of paper." Black's hand went to his own gun. "You're new here, so I'll give you one warning. Turn around, walk away." Isaac didn't move. The air grew thick, heavy with the promise of violence. The whole street had gone quiet. Everyone was waiting to see what the stranger would do, waiting to see if he was brave enough or stupid enough to die. And in that moment, Harriet realized this man, this Isaac Reed, was the most dangerous thing she had ever seen, because he was the only one in this whole miserable town who wasn't afraid of Jeremiah Black. And that was a death sentence. The wagon rattled away, leaving Isaac standing in the dust. The old-timer appeared at his elbow like a ghost. "Told you, that man is a walking funeral." Isaac didn't take his eyes off the shrinking wagon. He had a plan, a terrible, reckless plan. He was going to get a job at the Black Ranch. He walked into the saloon, a place called the Broken Spur, and announced he was looking for work. The bartender pointed him to a man at the end of the bar, Luke Peterson, a former foreman for Black. Luke was a man with haunted eyes and a bitter twist to his mouth. "Work for Black?" Luke snorted into his whiskey. "Son, you're either brave or a fool." "Just need the work," Isaac said, sliding onto the stool next to him. Luke told him everything. He told him about Black's cruelty, about how he cheated his men, about the climate of fear that hung over the ranch like a permanent winter. But then Isaac asked a question, his voice casual. "Heard he just hired a new housekeeper." Luke's face went dark. "That auction, disgraceful. It's not the first time, you know. He brings girls out there, says they're servants." "And what happens to them?" Isaac pressed. Luke stared into his glass. "The last one, a girl named Betsy. Sweet thing. Black said she ran off in the night, stole some money. But the truth is, she threatened to go to the law. The next day, she was just gone." He looked up at Isaac, his eyes full of a terrible certainty. "Nobody just runs off from that ranch. Not alive." The fire in Isaac's chest roared hotter. This wasn't just about injustice anymore. This was about saving a life. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that if he didn't get Harriet out of there, she would be the next girl to disappear. He rode out the next morning. The Black Ranch sprawled across the valley, a monument to one man's greed. Isaac was led into a study that was bigger than any church he'd ever seen. And behind a desk made from a whole tree sat Jeremiah Black. "Reed," Black said, looking him up and down. "I heard you were asking questions about me in town." Isaac didn't flinch. Wanted to know who I'd be working for. A slow, cold smile spread across Black's face. "And what about my new housekeeper, the one you were so concerned about?" "Heard she had a debt to settle," Isaac said, his voice flat. "Not my business." Black studied him for a long, silent moment. "I need men who can handle trouble. You look like you've seen your share." He hired him. $10 a week, and a warning. "Stay out of my business, Reed. That includes the main house, and everyone in it." As Isaac turned to leave, Black added one more thing, his voice a low hiss. "I don't give second chances. Remember that." Isaac walked out into the sunlight, but he felt a cold shadow fall over him. He'd done it. He was inside. But as he passed the kitchen, he saw Harriet through the doorway. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Hope was a dangerous thing on that ranch. But in that moment, a little bit of it bloomed in Harriet's heart. He was here. He had a plan. But then the days started to bleed together into one long nightmare. Harriet worked from before dawn until long after dusk. Black was a monster, finding fault in everything, his words like whips, his eyes always on her. And Isaac was just another cowhand. She saw him in the distance, working in the corrals, but he never spoke to her. He never even looked her way. The little bit of hope she'd felt began to wither and die. Maybe the old-timer was right. Maybe Isaac had just been a fool. A week after she arrived, she was cleaning Black's study. He was gone, riding the fences. Martha, the other housekeeper, a woman who seemed to be made of fear and silence, had warned her never to touch his desk. But Harriet couldn't help it. She was desperate. Using a hairpin, she picked the lock on a small drawer. Inside, she found it, her father's loan agreement. And a wave of cold fury washed over her. The loan wasn't for $2,000. It was for $500. The whole thing was a lie. Her entire life, this slavery, was built on a lie. She was carefully putting the paper back when a shadow fell across the desk. Jeremiah Black stood in the doorway. His face was a mask of cold rage. "What?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Do you think you're doing?" Harriet's heart hammered against her ribs. She backed away, but he was too fast. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers like steel bands. "I warned you about the rules, girl." Outside, Isaac was walking back from the corral. He heard a crash from the house, then a woman's cry, quickly muffled. The other hands in the yard suddenly found work to do on the other side of the ranch. They knew the sounds coming from that house. They knew to make themselves scarce. But Isaac stood frozen, listening. Wilson, the foreman, lit a cigarette, his expression unreadable. "Boss is disciplining the new girl," Wilson said, his voice casual. "None of our business." Another cry, this one sharp with pain. Isaac took a step toward the house. Wilson's hand clamped down on his arm. "That's a good way to get yourself killed, Reed, and it won't help her." Isaac was trapped. If he rushed in, they'd both be dead. But to do nothing, it was eating him alive. "This ain't right," he said through gritted teeth. Wilson took a long drag from his cigarette. He looked at Isaac, really looked at him, for the first time. "No," he said quietly. "It ain't." He dropped the cigarette, grinding it into the dust with his boot. "Black's having a party tomorrow night, celebrating a railroad deal. The whole county will be here. Place will be chaos." He looked up at Isaac, his eyes glinting. Might be a good time for a man to make a move, if he was smart about it. Isaac stared at him, stunned. Why was Wilson helping him? Wilson just shrugged. "Maybe I'm tired of burying Black's problems in shallow graves." He walked away, leaving Isaac standing there, the muffled sounds from the house echoing in his ears. He had one chance, tomorrow night. He had to get her out. Inside, Black stood over Harriet. Her lip was bleeding. He looked down at her, his chest heaving. "Let that be a lesson," he panted. "Next time, I won't be so gentle." She struggled to her feet, her body screaming in protest, but her eyes blazed with defiance. "The loan was for $500, she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You lied." For a second she thought he would kill her right there. His face turned a dark, mottled red. "The amount doesn't matter," he hissed. "You'll work until I say the debt is paid. And if you ever displease me again, you will beg for a quick death." That night, lying on her hard cot, Harriet made a decision. She would not die in this house. She would not be another one of Jeremiah Black's secrets buried in a shallow grave. Tomorrow night she would find Isaac, and together they would escape, or they would die trying. The party was a blur of fancy dresses and cigar smoke. Black was playing the gracious host, smiling and shaking hands, the devil in a tailored suit. Harriet moved through the crowds, her face a blank mask, her eyes scanning, searching. She finally saw him. Isaac, standing guard by the back door. She made her way toward him, her tray of drinks a shield. As she passed, she pretended to stumble, to adjust the glasses. "Can you help me?" she whispered, not looking at him. "Yes," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Tonight, after everyone's gone, grove of trees behind the bunkhouse. Can you get there?" "I think so. I'll be waiting. If you're not there by 1, I'm coming for you." And then he was gone, moving back into the shadows. The hours crawled by. Finally, the last wagon rattled away. The house fell silent. Black had passed out in his study, drunk on whiskey and power. "Go to bed, girl," Martha, the old housekeeper, told Harriet. Her voice was tired, but her eyes held something new, a flicker of sympathy. Harriet went to her room, but she didn't sleep. She waited, listening, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. When the house was completely still, she slipped out the back door and ran. The night was cold and clear, the stars like chips of ice in the black sky. She ran toward the dark shape of the cottonwood grove, her breath coming in ragged gasps. What if it was a trap? What if Isaac had sold her out to save himself? She reached the trees and stopped, her heart in her throat. And then a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Isaac. He was holding the reins of 2 saddled horses. "You came," she breathed, relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. "I said I would," he said simply. "We need to move. Fast." He helped her onto one of the horses. She looked at him, this man who was risking everything. "Why? Why are you doing this?" He looked at her, and in the moonlight, she could see the truth in his eyes. "Because from the moment I saw you on that platform," he said, his voice rough, "I couldn't walk away." They rode out, 2 ghosts slipping away from the sleeping ranch. They rode hard, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and that house of horrors. As the sun began to stain the eastern sky, they reached the foothills of the mountains. "We have maybe a 5-hour head start," Isaac said, his eyes scanning the trail behind them. "But he'll come. Men like Black don't let things go." They rode deeper into the mountains, the terrain growing rough and treacherous. Isaac moved with a confidence that told her he was no stranger to the wilderness. He was a scout, he told her, for the army. He'd tracked and been tracked. He knew how to disappear. They stopped to rest in a small clearing by a stream. He shared his jerky and hardtack with her. For the first time in months, Harriet felt safe. She told him about her father, the doctor. He told her about his family, about a sister who had suffered at the hands of a man just like Black. "I was too young to help her then," he said, his voice low and full of an old pain. "Some debts you pay forward." The moment was shattered by a sound, the distant thunder of hoofbeats. "They found us," Isaac said, already on his feet. "Sooner than I hoped." They were back on the horses in seconds, pushing deeper, higher into the mountains. But the sound of pursuit grew closer. They were being run to ground. They emerged onto a narrow trail that snaked along the side of a steep cliff. Below them, they could see the riders. 5 of them. And at their head, a figure she recognized with a lurch of terror. Jeremiah Black. "Ride ahead," Isaac yelled, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Get through the pass. I'll slow them down." "No, I won't leave you," she screamed back. Go! He roared, and there was no arguing with the command in his voice. She dug her heels into her horse's flanks and galloped toward the narrow cleft in the rock that marked the pass. She looked back once and saw Isaac dismount, taking cover behind a massive boulder, his rifle ready. Then the shooting started. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around her. She bent low, urging her horse on, the sound of the gun battle echoing in the narrow canyon. Isaac appeared behind her, riding hard, his face grim. A red stain was spreading across his sleeve. He was hit. They raced through the pass and out the other side, not stopping, not daring to look back. They plunged down into a densely wooded valley, finally finding a small cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. Isaac slumped off his horse, his face pale. The bullet had only grazed his arm, but he'd lost blood. As Harriet tore a strip from her petticoat to make a bandage, he watched her, his eyes full of a quiet intensity. "Why?" she asked again, needing to understand. "You owe me nothing." "I told you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't walk away." They built a small, smokeless fire, huddled together in the damp chill of the cave. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. They were alive, they were free, but they were not safe. Not yet. "What will you do?" he asked her. "After this?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I have nothing. No one." "I was heading to California," he said, staring into the tiny flames. "Thought I might try ranching again, on my own terms." He looked at her. "You could come with me, if you wanted." Before she could answer, a sound from outside the cave made them both freeze. The soft clink of a metal spur against stone. Someone was out there. Isaac moved in a blur, kicking dirt over the fire, pulling her deeper into the shadows of the cave. He drew his pistol, its barrel glinting in the faint light. A figure appeared at the mouth of the cave, a dark silhouette against the twilight sky. "Reed," a familiar voice called out. "I know you're in there. It's Wilson." Wilson, the foreman. Isaac's gun didn't waver. "What do you want?" "To talk. Alone." Isaac hesitated, then moved cautiously toward the entrance. Harriet held her breath, her hand clutching the small knife she'd taken from the ranch kitchen. Was this another trap? Wilson stood with his hands in the open. "Black's got men swarming these mountains," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They'll find you by morning." "Then why aren't you with them?" Isaac asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Wilson let out a long, tired sigh. "Because I'm done, Reed. I'm done being that man's dog." He looked up at the first stars pricking the dark sky. "I've done things I can't take back, but maybe I can do one thing right." He told them about a hidden trapper's cabin, 3 miles north, stocked with supplies, a safe place to hide. "Why?" Isaac asked again, the question hanging in the cold air between them. "Because Black's not just hunting you anymore," Wilson said, his face grim. "He plans to kill you both, make it look like an accident. I've helped bury too many of his accidents." He turned to go, then paused. "One more thing. He's not alone. He brought a man with him, a bounty hunter named Raster." Isaac went cold. Curtis Raster. A man who hunted other men for sport, a killer with a reputation that stretched across 3 territories. "How much time do we have?" Isaac asked. "I'll lead them south for a while. Buy you a few hours. By dawn, they'll know I've tricked them." Wilson swung onto his horse. "Make it count, Reed." And then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. They didn't wait. They saddled the horses and rode north, following the foreman's desperate directions. They found the cabin tucked away in a stand of pines, a tiny one-room shelter that looked like the most beautiful palace Harriet had ever seen. Inside, she cleaned and bandaged Isaac's arm properly. As she worked, their eyes met over the lantern light, and the air in the small cabin grew thick with unspoken things. He was scarred, not just on his arm, but all over. This was a man who had lived a hard, violent life, and he had thrown himself into the heart of it again, for her. He insisted she take the bed while he kept watch. As she drifted off to sleep, feeling safe for the first time in an eternity, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was falling in love with Isaac Reed. The next morning, it was raining, a cold drizzle that turned the forest into a world of gray mist. The rain was a blessing, washing away their tracks. As they ate a meager breakfast, Isaac spread out a map. "Silver Creek," he said, pointing to a spot on the other side of the mountains. "Mining town, 2 days' ride. We can get lost there." "And then?" she asked. "And then," he said, his eyes holding hers, "you get to have a life that's your own." They were about to leave when they heard it. Horses, 3 riders coming fast. "Get to the horses," Isaac said, shoving his pistol into her hand. "Go out the back. If you hear shooting, you ride west, and you don't stop. Don't look back. Promise me." She didn't want to leave him, but she saw the look in his eyes. She ran to the lean-to where the horses were hidden. She heard voices from inside the cabin. Tense, sharp, but no gunshots. After what felt like a lifetime, Isaac appeared. His face was grim. "It's not Black," he said. "It's the sheriff from Silver Creek." Relief washed over her, so potent it made her knees weak. But the look on Isaac's face stopped her. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She followed him back inside. A tall man with a silver star on his chest stood there, flanked by 2 deputies. "Miss Montgomery," the sheriff said. "I'm Sheriff Tanner. We've come to escort you to Silver Creek." "Why?" Harriet asked, her voice trembling. The sheriff's eyes were hard. "Because Jeremiah Black is wanted for the disappearance of 3 women, and because your friend Mr. Reed is under arrest for horse theft and assaulting an officer of the law back in Redemption Creek. It was a trap, not Black's trap, a different kind. The corrupt sheriff in Redemption Creek had wired ahead. Black's influence stretched further than they could have imagined. They had run right into the arms of the law, and the law was on Black's side. Isaac didn't resist. He knew it would be pointless. But as the deputies tied his hands, he looked at Harriet. His eyes conveyed a silent message. It's not over. Sheriff Tanner wasn't a bad man. He just believed in the law, and the telegram from Redemption Creek was official. But as they rode toward Silver Creek, with Harriet riding free and Isaac bound, she began to talk. She told Tanner everything. The auction, the lie about the debt, the beatings, the other girls, the fear in Martha's eyes. She spoke with a quiet, desperate dignity, and by the time she was done, a seed of doubt had been planted in the sheriff's mind. And then, something happened that changed everything. As they neared a narrow pass, the lead deputy signaled a halt. Riders were coming. Tanner led them off the trail into the cover of the trees. 4 men rode past, not 20 yards away. At the front was Jeremiah Black, and beside him, the hawk-faced bounty hunter, Raster. They were so close Harriet could hear Black's voice, cold and angry, cursing the rain for washing away the tracks. When they had passed, Tanner let out a low whistle. "That complicates things," he said, his eyes on Isaac's bound hands. He had seen the look on Black's face. He had seen the kind of man they were dealing with. He untied Isaac's hands. "Looks like your story just got a lot more believable, son," he said. "Black is heading to Silver Creek. He'll be waiting for us. We're taking the old mining trail. We're going in the back door." That night, they made a cold camp in the mountains. Harriet and Isaac sat huddled together under a single blanket, the unspoken emotions from the cabin still hanging between them. "I was so scared," she whispered into the darkness. "Me too," he admitted. His arm tightened around her. And then he kissed her. It was a kiss born of desperation and relief, of fear and a dawning, brilliant hope. In the heart of the wilderness, with death hunting them through the mountains, they had found each other. The next morning, they rode into Silver Creek. It wasn't much, just a muddy street lined with rough-hewn buildings. Tanner took them straight to his office. He was a man with a purpose now. He was going to take Jeremiah Black down. He sent for the judge. He began taking Harriet's official statement. But just as she was describing the forged loan document, the door to the office burst open. A deputy stood there, breathless. "Sheriff, it's Wilson. He just rode in, and he's been shot." They ran to the doctor's office. Wilson was on a table, a bloody bandage around his gut, but he was alive. And sitting in a chair beside him, her face pale and drawn, was Martha. "Black figured it out," Wilson rasped. "He was waiting for us. I got Martha out, but—" Martha looked at Harriet, her eyes full of a terror Harriet knew all too well. "He was going to kill me," she said, her voice a thin whisper. "Like he did the others." Then Wilson managed a weak smile. He pointed to a saddlebag on the floor. "Brought you something, Sheriff," he said. "Black's whole life, in paper and ink. It was all there. The real loan documents, doctored to look like legitimate debts. Letters from the girls who had disappeared, pleading for help. And Harriet's father's deed, with a forged signature handing his land over to Black. It was the proof they needed, the smoking gun." "He's at the Silver Nugget Saloon," Martha said. "Him and Raster, waiting for you." Tanner's face was grim. "It's time to end this." He looked at Isaac. "I need your gun." "I'm coming with you," Isaac said. It wasn't a question. Harriet grabbed his arm. "Be careful," she pleaded. He squeezed her hand, his eyes finding hers. "This ends today," he promised. "I'll be back." The Silver Nugget was quiet when they entered, 2 deputies with them. Black and Raster were at a table in the back, playing cards. They looked up, and Black actually smiled when he saw them. "Sheriff Tanner," he said, his voice smooth as poison. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Jeremiah Black," Tanner said, his voice booming through the saloon. "You're under arrest for fraud, kidnapping, and suspicion of murder." Black's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. "You'll need more than the word of a runaway girl, Sheriff." "We have Wilson's testimony," Isaac said, stepping forward. "And Martha's, and we have your ledgers." For the first time, a flicker of something, fear maybe, crossed Black's face. He exchanged a look with Raster, a silent, deadly agreement. And then all hell broke loose. Raster flipped the table. A gunshot exploded. One of the deputies went down. Black drew a tiny derringer from his sleeve and fired it at Isaac. The bullet grazed Isaac's temple as he dove for cover. The saloon was chaos, screaming patrons and shattering glass. Isaac came up firing, his shot catching Black in the shoulder. The fight was a blur of motion and noise. Tanner wrestling with one of Black's men, a deputy trading shots with Raster. But Isaac only had eyes for Black. "You should have minded your own business, Reed," Black roared from behind an overturned table. "This was always my business," Isaac yelled back. Black lunged out, firing wildly. A bullet tore through Isaac's side, a hot, searing pain. But Isaac's own shots found their mark. 1, then 2, hit Black square in the chest. The big man staggered, his eyes wide with disbelief. He wasn't dead. Not yet. He looked at Isaac, a lifetime of hate in his eyes. He pulled a knife from his boot and lunged. Isaac fired one last time. The shot echoed in the sudden, ringing silence. Jeremiah Black fell to the floor, his reign of terror finally over. It was done. Raster surrendered. The other men were rounded up. Tanner helped a bleeding Isaac back to the doctor's office. Harriet was there, waiting. She saw the blood on his shirt, and her face went white. "I'm all right," he said, his voice weak but steady. "It's over." He had promised he would come back, and he had. They stayed in Silver Creek for 2 months while Isaac and Wilson healed. The truth about Black's ranch came out, a flood of dark secrets that shocked the territory. His empire crumbled, his land and money seized by the law and distributed to the families of his victims. Harriet, as his last victim, was given enough to start a new life. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from the doctor's porch, Isaac turned to her. "I was thinking," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "Before we head to California, we might need to stop in Denver." "Denver?" she asked. "What's in Denver?" He took her hand. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "if we're going to be starting a new life together, I figured we ought to do it properly, as husband and wife." Tears of joy streamed down Harriet's face. "Isaac Reed," she said, laughing through the tears. "Are you proposing to me?" "Not very well," he admitted, "but yes, I am." "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times, yes. They left Silver Creek in a brand new wagon, part of a train heading west. Martha, her eyes finally free of the shadows that had haunted them for so long, decided to come with them. They were a strange little family, forged in violence and fear, but bound by something stronger. As their wagon crested the last hill, Harriet looked back at the town where her life had been saved, where her new life had begun. The nightmare was over. She turned her face to the west, toward the setting sun, toward the promise of California. Isaac's arm was strong and sure around her waist. "Ready?" he asked. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the dust of the trail rising around them, the future an open, unknown, and beautiful road. "I'm ready," she said. They had faced down the devil himself. Whatever came next, they would face it together. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of justice from the Wild West.